Thank you again for doing this. It's funny. I saw the film yesterday, so you're literally like the second person I've talked to about it. So
Wow. Who
totally.
was the first?
A rep from Netflix, oddly enough, like someone who was
Really?
like, yeah, they're like, oh, you saw it? Tell us everything. Uh,
Wow.
so yeah, it's kind of funny to talk to you about it because you know you have a investment in me liking it, but it
I
was
guess I do. Yeah.
yeah. No, I mean it would probably be interesting if I was like, it sucked. Let's talk about why it's bad.
I think the meeting would be over.
Yeah, you'd be like, first of all,
Actually, no.
you'd be like, please say it's all Ridley's fault. As long as it's all his fault, I can live with it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But no, I thought it was way more fun than I was expecting because
Oh, good.
I honestly I'm not huge into like true crime and like celebrity stuff. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't my movie going in, so like I was
Mhm.
prepared to be like, oh god. And
Yeah.
I gotta say, like the first,
I've had movies like that where I'm like, before they even begin, I'm like, oh God.
yeah, like
You
listen,
know?
I'm gonna give everything a chance, but
Yeah.
you definitely go in with like what's your interest level in the subject matter or what's the
Of
people
course. Yeah.
involved or like so just like okay the subject matter could go either way. The movie's on the longer side. Okay, there's a barrier of entry, but I gotta say like the first hour and change or so is a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. 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 Well,
It's
that was a big thing when I wrote it. I it was such a fine line between the characters taking themselves seriously, but the audience kind of not taking it too
yeah,
seriously, because that's where the humor lies. The fact that they're obviously larger than life, and the stakes for them are so high, but you kind of have to pop fun at them, otherwise it turns into a soap opera.
yeah. That's the fun that is kind of happening like on the internet at the moment because we're not allowed to talk about it for another like 3 or 4 days.
Oh, is that right?
I've hinted that I saw something and people gathered what it probably is, and then there's
Yeah.
inevitably people are like, it's got to be terrible because they're going so big, and you really want to explain like, well, no, that's a choice, like it's on purpose, like you're
Yeah. Yeah.
supposed to
Yeah.
be like they're ridiculous, but you can't, you're not supposed to say anything yet. But that's one of the things I did want to ask about it does do a really fine line of like, okay, these are all almost cartoon like versions of these people, but they're you know, when they're meant to be likable, they're likable. When they're meant to be doing like the heinous movie thing, you feel the big like, oh, what a turn. Like it has
Yeah.
that feel of like I'm making a movie with a capital M. And I'm just like curious when you decided I want to write this. How did you determine that's the manner to take it in? Because it is, I think, what makes this the difference between a fun like Hollywood movie and oh god, they think they're making this like real profound statement about rich people, which is I
Yeah.
think the movie no one wanted to see, you know?
I can't write that version. I
Yeah.
can't write that version of this story or any story. I just inherently look for humor in everything, especially in sort of dark subject matters or things that in other hands would probably be very straight dramas. I find, to me, the most compelling dramas are the ones that are peppered with irony and with humor. Um, and of course, there's a space for very serious dramas and things that do take themselves very seriously. But I don't think this movie would have succeeded like that. Also because who wants to watch, a family of rich assholes take themselves insanely seriously? It's like,
Exactly.
you want to kind of play with that preconceived notion and really highlight the grotesque nature of them and all of that kind of nuance that comes from human nature, essentially. From the fact that they're very complex. That there's a lot of shades to them.
That is what I liked the best about it, the most about it was that it has a very clear cut vision on who these people are and doesn't expect you to like be like, oh my god, they're such misunderstood figures. It has that like, let's show you the allure of being a member of the family, but like even from the beginning, the character who is the most like, well, we're important and this is who we are, is
Yeah.
always seen as like, well, you're a little like, really, you think this is who you are? Like even his brother, who like is a huge like larger than life almost, and it's Al Pacino, so it's gonna be a cartoon character. Is like you can't be like this. Like we're like people will look at you like you're crazy if you do this. Like have some fun with your life. Like it's interesting that you're able to paint them that way because I'm sure that's not how they saw themselves.
That's exactly right. That's and to the point that I made earlier, it's the way that you see yourself or the way that you sell yourself to the world is probably very different than who you really are. And so, especially in this case. And so, the joy of it in a way was kind of just going for it, with these characters, just really painting them in very bold colors. And of course, a lot of it was true. A lot of the nuances and the things that I found in the characters was already there because they're real people. But a lot of it was just, kind of taking them and then almost creating like abstractions of themselves, and being very free with it, not kind of worrying too much about the real life counterparts.
That's what I'm so fascinated about when people adapt anything or make something based on real people. Like, how do you decide when to like make something up is the wrong word, but like this is the movie version of this character. Like, when do you decide like, okay, they didn't do this, like they went X, but I want to go Y. It's better for the movie.
Yeah.
But how do you decide that's in keeping with the character that you're making?
That's a very good question, and it's such a delicate balance because I think the sort of the flourished answer to that is that you have to keep the essence true, and then of course you're very free to play with that and to paint it whichever colors you want, as long as the emotional core is true to the facts. But I think ultimately you have to accept and embrace the fact that it's a film and it's a work of creative fiction. And not that I would ever compare myself to Shakespeare, but Shakespeare's tragedies are based on real life characters, obviously, and a lot of them, Richard III historically was a very different person. You have to just be free to explore these people, and I think in a way, if the result strikes an emotional note, or if it results in a compelling story, then you did justice to the real people and to the real events.
Especially when you're like not necessarily trying to please them per se. Like,
Exactly.
if you're making a movie where you need their approval because they're, licensing something or whatnot, there's a whole other calculation. That's just the business side of does it happen or not. But here, it's way more about like what makes you feel like you've created a compelling character as opposed to what's the person. And then I'm sure just as a writer, you make your script, you're happy with it at a certain point, or ready to release it, because who's ever happy with anything they write?
Right.
And when a director comes on, they have their own ideas. So
that's exactly right.
What is that experience like, where you're sort of, I guess, almost waiting to be like, I hope this person sees the movie the same way I do, because I'm sure the names being bandied about are big names, and you go, well, okay, they're going to get their way, so I hope they don't see a completely different thing than I did.
Do you mean like for example, when Ridley came on board?
Yeah, I mean,
when the actors came on board, like
exactly. Like, I mean, obviously the actors, I don't know if you write with anyone in mind, just as like for your own.
I wrote it with Lady Gaga in mind.
Okay, well that makes sense. Like that's
yeah.
But yeah, like I'm sure the first time you hear Jared Leto or an Al Pacino like deliver a line, you're like, okay, that may not be how I heard it, but like, damn, if suddenly I'm not interested in what that character's saying.
Well, exactly. I have the great privilege of having Al Pacino and Jared Leto playing with my lines, and so it's a joy and it's an honor. And if they add an ad lib here or if they cut a line there, personally, I entrusted them completely with everything, and I never felt like there was a moment that felt false or that felt wrong or anything like that. Because also, the one thing that I learned from Ridley working with him is that you have to trust people. You have to trust your collaborators, you have to trust your actors, you have to trust the screenplay, and so the movie that you write is never going to be the movie that is made, and often it's different in a way that you didn't expect. And I think it's part of the process, and also being on set for 3 months was its own experience, because the magic of editing is insane. I mean, I was there every day looking at every take, and I was wondering, honestly, what will the movie be? Because you see all these different moments, and the way that Ridley directs, he really lets the actors fly. I mean, he's not the performance is shaped mostly in editing,
Yeah.
And so the whole process was just kind of like a constant discovery. And I think it's a very healthy thing to just sort of lean back a little bit and say, whatever it is, and hopefully it's good.
Oh yeah. And like you said, if they're changing something, hopefully it's for the better. But even if it's something that you may in your head initially go, oh, I really wanted that line, or like that's not what I would have had them say. Especially those two guys, like they're like eating the role up with like this passion for it that has to be flattering as a writer. Like, oh, they're like just like feasting on my lines. They're clearly enjoying it. And I'm sure
that is so
like,
right.
Who he doesn't have to be making movies anymore. Like he's doing it because he's having fun still, which is whatever he's doing, he clearly has the passion for it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think when an actor takes your script and riffs off of it, I think that's just it's a very complimentary thing. I think like that great line, father, son, and House of Gucci.
Yeah.
I did not write that line. That's not in the script. It was something that Gaga just came up with on the spot. And she does cross herself in the script, but the fact that she obviously had the inspiration from reading the script to do that is fantastic.
Oh yeah, and like another person who's just like so into the role that it's like that's the thing. Like it could easily have been too big or too small, but it is the right level of like, okay, she's going big, but this is a big character. Like she sees herself big and in a position where everyone around her is even bigger, not necessarily in like personality, but in stature. It matches. It makes sense, and it makes the driver at all even more interesting that he is the tallest like 3-foot person in the world in this movie.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because like the two movies that I was inspired by for this, they're quite different. Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
And I remember in my first meeting with Ridley and Janina, I told them that this should be like Sunset Boulevard told from Norma Desmond's point of view, as opposed to William Holden. And William Holden would be Maurizio. Yeah. So that was sort of the through line. And then also Scarface, because Scarface is so big and bold and all over the place in terms of tone, but it's so compelling. And Patrizia is a little bit of a female Scarface in a sense, that trajectory of sort of wanting everything, wanting more, and then essentially just detonating. And so it's a little bit of almost like a female gangster in a way.
Yeah, and that's I think the fun of the first sort of section is watching very slowly. Okay, I'm getting a little more. I'm getting a little more. Oh, now I want everything. And for a while you're with her, and at a certain point you start to be like, wait, I think this is going to go downhill. But there's this very like for a movie that's purposely I don't think being subtle. Like it's not trying to be a subtle examination. No. There is a subtle turn to like you're no longer supposed to be behind her on this one, or really anyone. Everyone stops being likable.
Yeah. Well, and for me personally, like I love bold choices, and I love I always admire and respect a film that may be flawed, but that has a real sense of adventure to it in terms of the choices that are made and that the heights that are attempted. And so, I'd much rather watch something like a Scarface that is, I don't think is the perfect movie in any way, but it's so entertaining, and it's so full of life and eccentric, and so that's just me as a viewer, and I think naturally that transfers to the way that I write and the way that I watch films.
Yeah. And I think that's really telling in how the movie plays, because it's I think because of when it's coming out and who's involved, I think there's this like initial, well, it must be an awards film, and like everyone assumes a certain thing when they hear that, and you watch it and like sure that's possibility, but it's really just meant to be a flashy, entertaining, like look at these people, like let's have a good time observing the downfall of like rich people. Like there's something to be said for that I think people maybe aren't expecting, like in an interesting way. I think everyone has a very preconceived notion about this film, including like obviously myself.
Including yourself. But I think we won you over, which is great.
Yeah, like I I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but I feel like it's just like really well done trash. Like in
Mhm.
that way that like you're supposed to be like, oh, what a train wreck. Let's watch these people just sort of like flounder and sort of enjoy the fact that like really the Gucci family is this mess. Like that
Yeah.
there's something to that because we don't, we would be like, everyone takes the royals very seriously, and I don't care. Like, okay, great. It's like if we paid for the Kardashians here, but
Right.
like if you saw them as like a mess, there's fun in that, and like, oh, they're supposed to be the
Well, people look for the mess.
Yeah.
People, I think, followed the tabloids hoping for some scandal to show up at some point.
Yeah.
It would be very boring if they didn't do anything wrong, if they were just
Yeah.
sort of like the perfect family.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. I also think just the fact that you're transported, to the 70s and 80s and 90s, you don't see these kinds of movies anymore. I mean, this is such a big movie, and only somebody with Ridley's experience and confidence could, in the middle of a pandemic, go off and make an epic fashion gangster movie that spans 3 decades.
Yeah.
It's insane, and the fact that he pulled it off is, that's why he's fucking Sir Ridley Scott.
Yeah. No, he
you know.
man knows what he's doing. To wrap up, I'm curious, like, what is it like when you watch it? Like you said, you're on set every day. You know that the edit is changing things a lot, and like,
Yeah.
I'm sure like the first time you watch it, probably maybe an assembly cut or whatever the time you get to see it is, your mind might be racing of like this could go any number of ways. Like,
oh, Joey, I thought that way when I was on set because this is my first film that I've had produced of my scripts, and there was definitely moments that I was quite sort of nervous or curious, but mostly nervous because when you've never, you don't really hear your dialogue performed, you don't see your scenes played out, and of course you wonder, you're like, is this going to work? Like I wrote this thing in my room in Brooklyn Heights, like, and now I'm here, and it's a 3-month shoot with these legends. So of course you're excited, but there's also a sense of, I hope I don't shit the bed, basically. But yeah, the experience of watching it is quite surreal because you forget that you wrote it. At least for me, like I was sort of watching it at the beginning. I was watching it as an audience member and forgetting that that essentially I'd written it. And then the other thing is that it changes so much with each cut. And then so you watch one version and it's 3 hours, and then it's like, okay, and then it's 2:45, 2:35, and and then there's music, and everything kind of just builds and builds, and then by the end of it, it really does feel like, oh, like this is a movie, like you said, with the capital M. But the process of sort of chiseling away at it and seeing this thing come out is quite wonderful, and it's also quite scary because you don't know what's underneath as you're chiseling. But I had the great benefit of of having one of the great directors, and knowing that no matter what, it was going to be something.
Yeah. And I personally, I love the music cues. I think that those are.
Oh yeah, me too. I love it.
Oh, like I didn't realize that was going to be the case because again, preconceived notion. Also, like the trailer maybe doesn't lean into that as much as maybe they should, but that's not our business. Like, once you start realizing, oh, there's a sense of humor to it all, and like just a sense of like we want you to feel like you're in the time, and this between that and just like the cars, and I had, like I said, way more fun than I was expecting. So that's the credit to Ridley and a credit to you.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I hope we made like the great fashion film.
Yeah, I mean, listen,
because there hasn't been many.
Yeah, like, the competition is not super stiff there.
No.
There is something to that, and I love that for someone who knows very little about fashion, as you can see from my like H&M Henley.
Looks good.
I like the scene. When they introduced the guy from Texas, and I'm trying to figure out like who is it going to be, and I guess before they say who it is, I was like, oh shit, I know one person, and I was right. That's kind of cool.
That's hilarious. You felt good.
Yeah, because the movie like it was an interesting choice not to like spell out immediately who exactly this person is, and just be like, they brought in someone, you're smart to figure out this is going to be a big deal person. We'll mention who it is in a little bit. I thought that was a moment where there was a subtle touch to something that could easily have been like stop, freeze frame, name on the bottom, and like something else, but that was like trust the audience to be like, we don't need to spell it out.
Yeah, and I love that they cast Reeve Carney, who's
Yeah.
wonderful, and I love that he doesn't look like the Tom Ford that you're used to seeing.
No.
You know, with the widow's peak and the, you know, very sort of dapper. I love that you're still left hanging and you know, questioning like, who is this guy? It would have been much more obvious if they, you know, found a Tom Ford lookalike of modern times. But we keep that sort of question lingering. Who is it? You know?
And it's just fun because you're like, that guy ends up making films. Like that guy who at the time is so like bold and eager and like, again, like having fun with what he's doing, which is such a difference to everyone in this family and this business who's like, we have a brand and we have this. And he's like, well, what about this? Like, there's just like, there's an enthusiasm that livens up the movie when it needs it. And I think that's another just like really fun touch.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this. And especially
thank you.
The, you know, at a slightly unique time. And like, I'm very curious to hear what everyone else has to say next week. It wasn't, you know, reduced capacity and all, like it wasn't the big bustling, like what's the buzz after the screening type thing we usually get. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what people think, but I
can't wait.
Yeah, exactly. Like just even as an audience member, I'm sure you're just like, well, I want to know.
Oh my God, I'm dying.
Exactly. Besides the whole, like, I want to keep working.
Yeah. Well, that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm very excited to see how people react.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this and congrats again.
Joey, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.